The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning, a sound so sharp it sliced through the hush like shattered glass. No one calls at that hour unless the world has cracked open. And when I saw the name flash across the screen, Eloan, I froze. Because Eloan was me. Or at least she used to be. Rain tapped against the window pane of my Brooklyn apartment, steady and mournful, as if the sky knew what was coming. My fingers hovered over the phone, trembling, not from the chill of the November air seeping through the old sash window, but from the impossible truth glowing in that caller ID. I hadn't gone by Eloan in over 10 years. Not since the night I fled Cedar Hollow, Oregon, with nothing but a duffel bag and a secret stitched into my ribs like shrapnel. I answered. Hello. My voice cracked, thin as parchment. Silence. Then a breath, slow, deliberate, and a whisper that wasn't mine. You shouldn't have come back. The line went dead. Outside, a street lamp flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the fire escape. My heart hammered against my sternum like a trapped bird. I hadn't returned to Cedar Hollow. I hadn't set foot in that town since 2012. And yet someone knew. Someone remembered. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the phone like it might bite. The apartment smelled of chamomile tea gone cold and the faint, lingering scent of oil paint. I'd been working on a new canvas before sleep claimed me. Now, sleep felt like a distant country. Cedar Hollow wasn't just any town. Nestled in the damp embrace of the Cascade foothills, it clung to its secrets like moss to stone. Population, 843. One diner. One post office. One unsolved disappearance that still haunted local whispers every autumn. Well, not officially. To the records, Eloan Vale vanished for 3 days in late October of 2012. Found wandering barefoot near the old rail bridge, hypothermic and muttering about voices in the trees. The sheriff chalked it up to a teenage breakdown. Her parents, my parents, moved us to Portland a month later. Changed my name to Lena. Enrolled me in a new school. Never spoke of it again. But I remembered the man in the yellow slicker standing beneath the oak at the edge of Miller's Field. The way he never moved, never blinked, just watched. I remembered the static that filled my bedroom radio the night before I disappeared, though it wasn't plugged in. And I remembered the whisper that followed me through the woods, calling my name in a voice that sounded exactly like my own. Now, 13 years later, that voice had found me in Brooklyn. I scrolled through my recent calls. Nothing unusual, just a dentist appointment reminder, a missed call from my editor, a wrong number. No trace of the call that shouldn't exist. Then my email pinged. A new message. Subject, you left something behind. From hollowvoice@protonmail.com. Sent at 3:17 a.m. My breath hitched. I clicked it open. No body text. Just an attachment, a grainy photograph, time-stamped October 29, 2012. It showed me, 16 years old, standing in the woods behind Cedar Hollow High. Rain soaked my hair, my eyes wide, mouth open mid-scream. But that wasn't what made my blood turn to ice. Behind me, barely visible through the downpour, stood the man in the yellow slicker. Only this time I could see his face. It was mine. Not Lena's. Not the woman I'd become. But Eloan's, exactly as I looked the night I vanished. Same hollow cheeks. Same chipped front tooth from a childhood fall. Same silver locket, engraved with a knee, hanging crooked around his neck. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood, the screen still glowing like an unblinking eye. Outside, the rain fell harder. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then fell silent. I knew then I couldn't stay. Not here. Not anywhere safe. Because if he'd found me once, he'd find me again. And next time he wouldn't call. I packed quickly, passport, cash, a change of clothes, my grandmother's hunting knife wrapped in a flour sack. As I zipped the duffel, my gaze drifted to the half-finished painting on my easel. A forest at dusk, a single figure walking toward a distant light. I titled it, Eloan's Return. I hadn't known I was painting a prophecy. At 4:48 a.m., I stepped into the hallway, locking the apartment behind me. The elevator groaned as it descended. My reflection in the polished metal doors looked gaunt, haunted. On the street, the city slept beneath a veil of mist. Neon signs bled color into puddles. A taxi idled at the corner, its driver scrolling through his phone. I raised my hand. As I slid into the back seat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Another call. Same name. Aloan. I stared at it, the screen pulsing like a heartbeat. The driver glanced back. Where to? I didn't answer right away. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the kind that lingers like a secret. Somewhere far west, beyond the Hudson River and the endless sprawl of highways, the pines of Cedar Hollow stood sentinel in the fog. Waiting. I took a breath. To the airport, I said. Then, before I could stop myself, I swiped to answer. Static hissed through the line. Then, clear as winter air, my own voice, soft, sad, and impossibly close, whispered, "You're already here." The voice didn't echo. It didn't distort or flicker like a bad connection. It sat inside my skull like it had always been there, steady, intimate, and utterly wrong. My fingers gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The taxi driver watched me in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed, but I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. "You're already here," it said again, slower this time, as if savoring each syllable. I slammed the phone face down on the seat beside me, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The city lights blurred past the rain-streaked window, amber, crimson, electric blue, each one a reminder that I was still in the real world. Still in Brooklyn. Still safe. But was I? The airport. That's where I'd go. JFK. Booked the first flight out. Anywhere. Portland. Denver. Toronto. It didn't matter as long as it wasn't Oregon. As long as it wasn't home. Yet something in that voice, it hadn't sounded threatening. Not exactly. It sounded resigned. Tired. Like someone who'd waited a long time and was finally being heard. "Ma'am?" the driver asked gently. "You okay?" I nodded, though my throat felt sealed shut. "Yeah. Just a bad dream." He gave a quiet hum of understanding and turned up the heater. Warm air rushed through the vents, but it did nothing to thaw the chill coiled deep in my bones. At the terminal, I moved on autopilot, checked flight boards, approached a kiosk, swiped my card. A red-eye to Chicago. Departure in 2 hours. It would do. I found a corner gate near a shuttered pretzel stand and sank into a plastic chair, my duffel bag clutched to my chest like armor. The phone remained silent. I dared to pull it out again. No missed calls. No new messages. The photo was still there though, the one from the woods. I zoomed in on the figure behind me. The face was unmistakable. Same sharp jawline. Same scar above the left eyebrow I'd gotten falling off my bike at age 9. Same locket, my locket, stolen the night I vanished and never recovered. Oh, unless... The thought slithered in, cold and unwelcome. What if I never came back from those woods? What if the girl who walked out 3 days later wasn't me at all, but something wearing my skin? I squeezed my eyes shut. That was the kind of thinking that had landed me in therapy for 2 years after Cedar Hollow. Delusions, paranoia, dissociation. The doctors had been kind but firm. Trauma rewires memory. The mind invents doubles to survive unbearable truths. But this wasn't memory. This was evidence. Digital. Time-stamped. Sent to me now in real time. A boarding announcement crackled overhead. Delta Flight 1147 to O'Hare, now boarding at Gate B22. I stood, slinging the duffel over my shoulder, and walked toward the jet bridge. Halfway down the corridor, my phone vibrated. Not a call. A text. From an unknown number. It read, "Gate B22 leads to nowhere. Try B7. My steps faltered. Gate B7 was for a flight to Portland. Non-stop. Departing in 30 minutes. I turned and walked faster, eyes fixed ahead. Coincidence? It had to be. Someone was watching. Someone who knew my patterns, my panic, my past. Maybe a private investigator hired by my parents. Or worse, a journalist digging into cold cases. Cedar Hollow had made national news for a week back in 2012. Mystery girl found after forest ordeal, the headlines had screamed. But no reporter would have that photo. No one had ever seen it but me. Unless I stopped walking. What if it wasn't sent by someone else? What if I send it to myself? Not consciously, not willingly, but the way sleepwalkers leave the house in the dead of night. The way trauma survivors sometimes slip into fugue states and reenact old horrors without knowing. Had I been doing that all along? Leaving breadcrumbs only I could follow, back to the place I swore I'd never see again? I turned on my heel and strode toward gate B7. The boarding line was short. A young couple with matching backpacks. An older man in a fishing vest. Me with my haunted eyes and trembling hands. The agent scanned my ticket without looking up. Inside the plane, I took the window seat in row 23. Raindrops streaked the tarmac beyond the window, reflecting runway lights like scattered stars. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memory did. The woods behind Cedar Hollow High. The smell of wet pine and rotting leaves. My sneakers sinking into mud as I ran from what I couldn't remember, only that terror had wrapped around my lungs like wire. And then the voice. Not from behind. Not from the trees. From inside my own mouth. You don't have to be afraid, it had said. I'm you. The part you left behind. I turned. And there I stood, drenched, gaunt, eyes full of sorrow, reaching out a hand. I screamed. And then, nothing. Until I woke up 3 days later on the rail bridge, frost in my hair, my locket gone, and a new name waiting for me like a clean sheet of paper. The plane's engines roared to life. We taxied down the runway, gathering speed, lifting into the storm-laced sky. Brooklyn fell away beneath us, swallowed by clouds. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't want to look, but I did. A new message. Same unknown number. Welcome home, Eloan. Below, the clouds parted for a moment. And there, far to the west, a thin ribbon of highway cut through the blackness. Route 20 winding its way toward the Cascade foothills. Toward Cedar Hollow. I didn't text back. Didn't call. Just powered off the phone and slipped it into the seat back pocket. But as the plane banked southward toward Portland, I knew. This wasn't escape. It was return. And this time I wouldn't run. I'd face the girl in the yellow slicker. I'd ask her what she wanted. And I'd listen, really listen, to the voice that had been waiting 13 years to be heard. Because maybe the truth wasn't that I'd been taken that night. Maybe I'd split. Maybe part of me stayed in those woods, tethered to the fear, the confusion, the unanswered questions. And maybe that part had grown stronger while I tried to forget. Strong enough to call. Strong enough to find me. Strong enough to bring me back. The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled into sleep. Outside, the night stretched on, vast, indifferent, full of whispers. I pressed my palm against the window and whispered back, so softly no one could hear. I'm coming. The plane touched down in Portland just after 6:30 in the morning, the sky a bruised purple streaked with the first pale fingers of dawn. Rain drummed against the tarmac, steady and insistent, as if the Northwest itself remembered me and disapproved of my return. I kept my seatbelt fastened long after the other passengers had risen, clutching my duffel like it was the last thing tethering me to who I'd tried to become. Lena had lived in cities. She drank oat milk lattes, argued about art theory in Brooklyn galleries, and flinched only at thunder, not silence. But Lena was a costume now, and it was starting to fray at the edges. I stood, shoulders stiff, and joined the shuffle toward the terminal. My rental car waited in the long-term lot, a silver sedan with Oregon plates and a faint scent of pine air freshener that couldn't quite mask the damp upholstery underneath. I drove west without GPS, guided only by old muscle memory and the pull in my chest that felt less like fear and more like gravity. Route 26 cut through rolling hills cloaked in mist, past sleepy towns with names like Oxbow and Brightwood. The radio played soft country, something about lost love and dusty roads, but I turned it off after 10 miles. The silence was worse but honest. By noon, I crossed into Clackamas County. The pines grew taller, denser, their branches knitting together overhead like cathedral arches. Fog pooled in the hollows between hills, swallowing fence lines and mailboxes whole. And then, just past a rusted cattle guard, the sign. Cedar Hollow, Pop 843. It hadn't changed. Not really. The same peeling paint on the post office. The same diner with its neon coffee cup flickering erratically. The same high school squatting on the hill, its windows dark even in daylight. But everything felt sharper, as if the world had been blurred for years and I was only now seeing it in focus. I parked outside Miller's Field, the very edge of town where the pavement gave way to gravel and then to dirt. The oak tree still stood, gnarled and massive, its roots cracking the old stone wall that separated civilization from the forest. That was where I'd seen him. The man in the yellow slicker. Except he hadn't been a man. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying ferns. No birds sang. No wind stirred the leaves. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like water. I walked to the tree. My boots sank slightly into the mud, same as that night. I reached out, fingertips brushing the bark. It was cold. Alive. Why now? I whispered. No answer. But then a rustle. Far off, deep in the woods. Not an animal. Too deliberate. Too slow. I turned. Between the trunks, maybe 50 yards in, stood a figure. Yellow slicker. But up. Hands in pockets. Still as stone. My breath caught. Not because I was afraid. Because I recognized the way he stood. The tilt of his head. The slight hitch in his left shoulder. The old injury from falling out of this very tree at age 11. Was me. Not a memory. Not a hallucination. A living, breathing echo. I didn't run. I walked toward him. Each step heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted my return. The forest closed around me, swallowing sound, light, time. By the time I reached the clearing where I'd vanished, the figure hadn't moved. Only when I stood 10 feet away did he lower his hood. Alone. Same face. Same eyes, wide, dark, rimmed with exhaustion. But older. Harder. The girl who never left. You kept running, she said. Her voice was mine, but rougher, weathered by years of solitude and wind. I had to, I replied. I couldn't stay here. Not after what happened. What happened? She echoed, and there was no accusation in her tone, only sorrow. You think you left me behind. But you took the easy parts. The ones that could smile in Portland. The ones that could pretend it never happened. And you? I stayed with the truth. She stepped forward. The night you disappeared wasn't the first time you heard the voice. It wasn't the last. You've been hearing it your whole life. Whenever you felt lost, small, broken. You just called it anxiety. Or intuition. Or coincidence. I shook my head. That's not. It's you, she interrupted gently. The part that remembers. The part that never stopped listening to the woods. I looked around the clearing. Moss clung to fallen logs. A crow watched from a high branch, silent. Everything felt charged, as if the air itself held its breath. Why call me back? She reached into her coat and pulled out a small object, tarnished silver, heart-shaped. My locket. The one I'd lost. You dropped this the night you ran, she said, holding it out. But it wasn't yours to lose. It was mine. I took it. The metal was warm, humming faintly against my palm. I fumbled with the clasp. Inside, where there should have been a photo of my parents, was a single word etched in tiny, precise letters. Remember. Tears blurred my vision. Not from grief. From recognition. All these years, I hadn't been haunted by a stranger. I'd been haunted by myself, the self I abandoned to survive. And she hadn't wanted to hurt me. She wanted to be whole again. I'm sorry, I whispered. She smiled then, small, sad, real. You don't have to be Lena anymore. You don't have to be alone either. You can just be. The wind stirred at last, rustling the canopy above. For the first time in 13 years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like waiting. Like coming home. I slipped the locket around my neck. It settled against my skin like it had never left. We turned together and walked deeper into the woods. Not away from the world, but toward something older, quieter, truer. The trees parted as if they'd been expecting us. And somewhere ahead, beneath the roots of the oldest cedar, a door waited. Not made of wood or metal, but of memory and moss and moonlight. I reached for her hand. She took it, and we stepped through. Beyond the threshold, the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, but denser, richer, as if time itself had thickened into something you could breathe. The forest floor gave way to smooth, moss-covered stone, worn by centuries of footsteps I couldn't see but somehow remembered. Faint light filtered through the canopy above, not from the sun. There was no sun here, but from clusters of bioluminescent fungi clinging to ancient trunks, pulsing softly like slow, sleeping hearts. Eloan walked beside me, her presence no longer a fracture in reality but a quiet harmony. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The woods spoke for her, in the creak of branches, the whisper of leaves, the distant trickle of a stream that sounded like a lullaby half-remembered from childhood. We followed the path deeper, past twisted roots that curled like sleeping serpents and stones carved with symbols I'd never seen yet understood. Circles within spirals, eyes within hands, names written in languages lost to history but not to blood. My locket grew warmer with every step, not burning but humming, a low, steady resonance that matched my pulse. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice barely louder than a breath. "To where it began," she replied, not looking at me, eyes fixed ahead. "Not the night you vanished. Before that. Before the fear. Before the forgetting." I frowned. "What happened before that?" She stopped, turned. Her eyes held mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. "You were born here," she said. "Not in the hospital in Bend. Not in the world of streetlights and school bells and social security numbers. You were born in this hollow, under the oldest cedar, wrapped in moss and starlight, with the wind singing your name before your mother ever knew you'd come." I shook my head. "That's not possible." "Isn't it?" She gestured to the locket. "Open it again." I did. The word "remember" still glowed faintly, but now beneath it, new lines had appeared, fine, delicate etchings as if drawn by spider silk. Asterisk, "You are not lost. You are returning." Asterisk. Asterisk, "You are not broken. You are remembering." Asterisk. Asterisk, "You are not alone. You never were." Asterisk. Tears welled again, but I let them fall. They didn't feel like weakness. They felt like release, like rain after a long drought. We walked on. The path sloped downward, winding into a natural amphitheater formed by towering ferns and black basalt walls slick with moisture. In the center stood a single tree, enormous, ancient, its bark blackened in places as if charred by lightning, yet alive, bursting with emerald moss and clusters of white flowers that smelled like jasmine and storm air. At its base lay a shallow pool, its surface so still it reflected the glowing fungi above like stars in a midnight sky. "This is the heartwood," Eloan said, her voice hushed with reverence. "The place between what is and what was. The place where names are given and remembered." She knelt by the pool and dipped her fingers into the water. It rippled, not outward but inward, as if swallowing the disturbance whole. She beckoned me closer. "Look," she whispered. I knelt beside her and peered into the pool. At first, I saw only my reflection, Lena's tired eyes, Eloan's sharp cheekbones, the locket resting against my collarbone. But then the water stilled again and the image shifted. A woman stood beneath the heartwood, her hair woven with ferns, her hands resting on a swollen belly. She wasn't my mother. Not the woman who raised me in Portland. This woman's eyes were the color of river clay, her skin dusted with ash and pollen. She sang, a wordless melody that vibrated in my bones. And around her, figures emerged from the trees. Not ghosts. Not spirits. People. Men and women with eyes like mine, faces lined with wisdom and wildness, wearing cloaks of bark and bone. They placed their hands on her shoulders, on her belly, on the earth beneath her feet. A birth, not just of a child, of a keeper. "You come from a line of listeners," Eloan said softly. "Those who hear the voice of the land, the trees, the silence between heartbeats. You weren't meant to live in cities. You were meant to tend the threshold." I stared transfixed. "But I left." "You were taken," she corrected gently. "Not by force, by design. When the world outside grew too loud, too sharp, too hungry for your kind, the hollow hid you. It wrapped you in a new name, a new life, a new skin. But it never let go. It waited. It called. And now, you've answered." I touched the water. The vision dissolved into ripples, then reformed, not as memory but as choice. Me standing in Brooklyn, painting forests I'd never seen but always knew. Me waking at 3:17 a.m., heart pounding as if summoned. Me boarding a plane not to escape but to return. It was always leading back here, I realized aloud. Eloan nodded. The phone call wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a split personality. She was the part of me that never left the pact. The part that stayed to guard the door while I learned how to survive in a world that doesn't believe in moss-written names or pools that show truth. What happens now? I asked. You choose, she said. You can go back. Live as Lena. Forget again. The hollow will let you. It loves you enough to release you. And if I stay? Her eyes gleamed with something like hope. Then you remember everything. You walk both worlds. You tend the threshold. You listen. And one day, you'll call someone else home. I looked at the heartwood, at the pool, at the locket burning softly against my skin. I thought of Brooklyn, the noise, the speed, the constant performance of being okay. And I thought of this place, the silence, the depth, the truth that didn't need to be explained, only felt. I took a deep breath. I'm not Lena, I said, and I'm not just Eloan. I stood, pulling her up with me. Her hand was warm. Real. Mine. On the bridge, I said. The moment the words left my lips, the heartwood shivered. A single white flower fell from its highest branch, landing soundlessly in the pool. The water glowed, then darkened, then cleared, showing not a reflection, but a path leading deeper into the earth, lit by roots that pulsed with golden light. Eloan smiled. Not sad this time. Oh. Then let's go, she said. And together, no longer two but one, we stepped into the rootlit passage. Above us, the wind sighed through the canopy. In Cedar Hollow, the rain slowed to a drizzle. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a phone rang once in an empty apartment, then fell silent forever. But here, beneath the oldest cedar, in the place between names and time, the listening began anew. The passage beneath the heartwood was cool and narrow, the walls lined with living roots that glowed with a soft amber light, pulsing gently, like the breath of something vast and sleeping. The air smelled of damp earth, crushed pine needles, and something older, sweeter. Petrichor mingled with wild mint and the faint metallic tang of deep groundwater. With every step, the locket around my neck grew warmer, not uncomfortably so, but like a hand resting gently over my heart, reminding me I was not alone. Eloan walked ahead, her form no longer separate from mine but woven into the rhythm of my stride, our steps falling in unison as if we had always moved this way. The deeper we went, the more the silence changed. It wasn't empty. It was full, crowded with whispers that weren't words but feelings. Longing, warning, welcome. They brushed against my skin like gossamer threads, pulling me forward, pulling me home. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Took my breath away. The ceiling arched high above, studded with crystalline formations that caught the root light and fractured it into 1,000 gentle rainbows. In the center of the chamber stood a stone dais, smooth and ancient, carved with the same spiraling symbols I'd seen on the path above. Around it, shallow channels carried water in slow concentric circles, fed by hidden springs that sang as they flowed. And in the middle of the dais, a chair. Not a throne. Not ornate. Just a simple seat hewn from a single slab of black basalt, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. The seat of listening, Eloan said, her voice echoing softly in the chamber. Where the keeper sits when the threshold trembles. I approached slowly, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with the earth. The water channels hummed beneath my feet, a low, resonant frequency that settled into my bones. As I reached the dais, I saw that the chair wasn't empty. Resting on its surface was a journal. Bound in what looked like deer hide, its edges frayed, its spine cracked with age. I picked it up. It was heavier than it appeared, dense with memory. The cover bore no title, only a single symbol, a spiral within an open hand. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, not mine yet unmistakably familiar. Loops and slants I'd made 1,000 times in school notebooks, but older, steadier, inked in something dark and rich, walnut gall, perhaps, or crushed charcoal mixed with rainwater. The first entry was dated October 31st, 2012. They took my name today, it read. Asterisk wrapped me in Lena like a second skin. Said it would protect me. But names are not coats. They are roots. And without roots, how do you hear the earth speak? Asterisk. My hands trembled. I flipped further. Asterisk, the city is loud. Too loud. It drowns out the whispers. But sometimes in the quiet between subway trains, I hear it, the call from the hollow. I paint the trees I've never seen. Dream of moss and moonlight. Lena doesn't understand. But Aloan remembers. Asterisk. Page after page told the same story, not of escape but of exile. Of longing. Of a self split in two to survive a world that had no place for listeners. At the very back, a fresh page. Blank. Except for one line written in ink that was still slightly damp. Now you choose what comes next. I looked up at Aloan. She stood at the edge of the dais, watching me with eyes full of patience and peace. What do I write? I asked. Whatever your truth demands, she replied. The hollow doesn't command. It only listens and responds. I sat in the chair. The moment I did, the chamber stilled. The water ceased its hum. The light dimmed, then brightened, focused now on the journal in my lap. I reached into my coat pocket, habit, not need, and found a pen I didn't remember bringing. Its tip gleamed in the amber glow. I wrote, I'm not leaving again. As the words formed, the locket flared warm against my chest. The water channels resumed their song, deeper now, richer. The roots overhead shimmered brighter, as if celebrating. I kept writing. Asterisk, I will tend the threshold. I will listen when the wind speaks. I will answer when the lost ones call. I will remember the names the world forgets. Asterisk. With each sentence, the chair seemed to sink deeper into the stone, as if the earth itself was accepting my vow. And then, a shift. Not in the chamber but in me. A door inside my mind unlatched. Memories flooded in, not as fragments but as a river. I remembered the language of owls. I remembered how to read the patterns in falling leaves. I remembered the taste of moonlight on my tongue. I remembered kneeling in this very chamber as a child, placing my palm on the dais, promising to return. I hadn't been taken that night in 2012. I had been recalled. And now I was home. I closed the journal. It fused shut with a soft click, the spiral symbol glowing faintly before fading. Aloan stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. It's done, she said. I stood. What now? Now, she said, gesturing to a narrow archway on the far side of the chamber, you learn what it means to be keeper. We walked through the arch into a smaller room, this one lined with shelves carved directly into the stone. On them rested objects that hummed with quiet power. A flute made of river reed, a bowl filled with obsidian shards, a coil of rope braided from willow bark, jars of dried herbs labeled in a script that made my eyes water if I stared too long. And on the far wall, a row of bells, each no larger than a walnut, each forged from a different metal, each tuned to a different sound. The bells wake the sentinels, Aloan explained. The flute calls the rain. The bowl holds silence when the world grows too loud. She handed me a small knife with a bone handle. This cuts through illusion. Not flesh. Never flesh. I took it. It felt right in my hand, like it had always belonged there. For days, or perhaps weeks, time moved differently here. We trained. I learned to read the signs in spiderwebs, to interpret dreams sent through falling acorns, to brew teas that sharpened the inner ear. I practiced sitting in utter stillness until the forest spoke directly into my thoughts. And at night, I sat in the seat of listening, journal open, recording what I heard, not just from the hollow but from beyond. A hiker lost near Mount Hood, whispering her daughter's name into the dark. A teenager in Seattle staring at his phone, feeling utterly alone. An old woman in Portland burning sage in her apartment, praying for a sign that her granddaughter was safe. They didn't know they were calling me, but I heard them. And slowly I began to answer. Not with words. Not with grand gestures, but with nudges, a sudden break in the clouds guiding a lost hiker to a trail marker, A song playing on the radio that reminded a lonely boy he mattered, a dream of a silver locket that led a grandmother to check her messages and find the call she'd been waiting for. The hollow worked through me, and I at last let it, until one evening as I sat by the pool beneath the heartwood, the water rippled without wind. A new face appeared, pale, frightened, eyes wide with disbelief. A young man, mid-20s, dark curls, freckles across his nose, wearing a worn flannel shirt. Behind him, city lights blurred into rain. He was holding a phone, and on the screen, the name, Eloan. My breath caught. He hadn't called me. I had called him. The cycle had begun again. I stood, heart full, and turned to Eloan, who now stood not beside me but within me, her presence no longer separate, only whole. "It's time," I said. She nodded. And together, we stepped back toward the root-lit passage, toward the surface, toward the phone that would soon ring in the dead of night. Not to haunt, but to heal. The rain had returned to Cedar Hollow by the time we neared the surface. A soft, steady drizzle that slicked the moss and turned the forest floor into a mirror of sky and shadow. I emerged beneath the heartwood just as twilight bled into the trees, the air thick with the scent of wet bark and distant wood smoke. My boots sank slightly into the earth, but I no longer felt the mud as an obstacle. It was a greeting. A welcome back. Eloan didn't walk beside me anymore. She didn't need to. She was the quiet certainty in my breath, the steadiness in my hands, the knowing in my bones. We were not two halves made whole. We had always been one, merely folded away for safekeeping. I walked to the edge of Miller's Field, where the gravel road met the wild. The town lay quiet below, lights flickering on in kitchen windows, porch swings creaking under the weight of evening routines. Life went on, oblivious to the threshold I now tended. And that was as it should be. The hollow did not demand worship. It only asked for remembrance. Back in my old family home, long abandoned, its shingles grayed by decades of rain, I found the key still hidden beneath the loose brick by the back step. The door groaned open, exhaling a breath of dust and cedar and time. Inside, everything remained as it had been the day we left. The crocheted afghan draped over the couch, my mother's gardening gloves on the windowsill, a half-finished puzzle of the Oregon coast on the dining table. But in my old bedroom, something had changed. On the windowsill, where I once kept seashells and dried flowers, sat a new object. A small ceramic bowl, hand-thrown, glazed in deep forest green. Inside it rested a single white feather, long, soft, unmistakably from a great horned owl. I picked it up. It hummed faintly. A gift. A signal. I placed it in my coat pocket, beside the bone-handled knife, and set to work. Over the next few days, I cleaned the house not as an act of nostalgia, but as preparation. I aired out the rooms, swept the floors, lit beeswax candles to burn away stagnation. In the basement, I found my father's old workbench and repurposed it into a listening station, laying out the journal, the bells, jars of sage and sweetgrass, a coil of copper wire that would carry resonance from the earth to the surface. At night, I sat on the porch with a cup of nettle tea, watching the stars blink awake through the veil of mist. The locket never left my skin. It had become part of me like a second heartbeat. And then, on the seventh night, the phone rang. Not my old Brooklyn phone. That was gone, left behind like a shed skin. This was a landline I'd reconnected, its cord coiling like a root into the wall. The sound was different here. Softer, deeper, as if the ring traveled through soil before reaching my ears. I picked up on the first chime. Hello. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Is this Eloan? The voice was young, male, trembling with exhaustion and something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation. Yes, I said, not as a lie, not as a performance, but as a truth reclaimed. It's me. I don't know why I'm calling, he whispered. I saw your name on my screen. I don't have your number. I've never met you. But I heard you. Where are you? Seattle. My apartment. It's 3:17 a.m. My chest tightened. The hour. The same hour I'd been called back. What did you hear? A whisper. In the static between stations. On the wind through my cracked window. Said, "You're not alone." But it sounded like me. I closed my eyes. The hollow was reaching. Through me. Through him. Do you believe in places that remember you? I asked gently. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think I have to. Then listen carefully, I said. Go to Volunteer Park tomorrow at dawn. Stand by the old cedar near the conservatory. Don't bring your phone. Don't wear headphones. Just be still. And when the wind moves through the branches, don't speak. Just listen. What am I listening for? For your name, I said. The one you were born with, not the one the world gave you. He exhaled, a sound like relief and fear tangled together. Okay. Before you go, I added, look in your left jacket pocket. Pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. There's a feather. Keep it close, I said. It's been waiting for you. I hung up. Outside, an owl called, once low and resonant, from the ridge above the house. I stepped onto the porch and looked up. The clouds had parted, revealing a sliver of moon. The work had begun. Over the following weeks, more calls came. Not many. Never many. The hollow chose carefully, those on the edge of forgetting themselves, those whose souls still hummed with the old frequency. A nurse in Boise waking from dreams of blackberry brambles. A mechanic in Eugene who kept finding pine needles in his toolbox. A college student in Eugene who painted forests she'd never visited, always with a figure in a yellow slicker watching from the trees. To each I gave a task, a place, a time, a symbol, not to summon them here, not yet, but to awaken the listener within them, to remind them they were not broken for hearing what others couldn't. And slowly, quietly, the threads began to weave. One evening, as I sat by the Heartwood pool recording a new entry, the girl from Portland heard the crow's warning and avoided the bridge collapse. I felt a presence behind me. I turned. A young woman stood at the edge of the clearing. Mid-20s. Dark eyes. Hair braided with dried lavender. She wore a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and held a white feather in her palm. She didn't look afraid. She looked recognized. You called me, she said. I smiled. I listened. She stepped forward, her boots silent on the moss. I didn't know where I was going, but my car kept turning west. Every wrong turn led me closer. The hollow guides those who are ready, I said, rising. She looked at the locket around my neck, then touched her own throat, where a matching one, tarnished but whole, rested against her skin. I found it in my grandmother's cedar chest, she said, etched with the same word. Remember, I finished. She nodded. I held out my hand. Not to lead. To welcome. She took it. And together we walked toward the rootlit passage, not as teacher and student, not as keeper and seeker, but as echoes finally meeting in the same song. Above us, the wind moved through the oldest cedar, carrying the names of those still lost, those still listening, those still on their way home. And deep in the earth, the water sang on. The days blurred into weeks, then months. The hollow thrived. More seekers came, drawn not by rumor, but by the quiet pull in their dreams, the feather on their windowsill, the name that echoed in their own voice at 3:17 a.m. I welcomed them all, taught them to listen, to remember, to tend. The chamber beneath the heartwood grew warmer, brighter, alive with shared purpose. We wove willow charms, brewed moon-touched teas, and sat in silence until the forest spoke through our lips. The journal filled with new hands, new truths, new vows. I believed we were healing. I believed we were whole. Then came the night the bells fell silent. All of them. At once. I was in the seat of listening when it happened. The journal lay open, my pen hovering over a fresh line. The boy from Spokane found his sister's locket buried beneath the riverbank, just as the dream foretold. And then, nothing. No hum from the roots. No song from the water. No whisper in the air. Just silence. Not the deep, living silence of the hollow, but the dead, hollow silence of something watching. I stood, heart pounding. Eloan, no longer separate but part of my breath, stirred uneasily within me. Something's wrong, I whispered. I climbed the rootlit passage, emerging beneath the heartwood. The night was still. Too still. No crickets. No owls. Even the wind had stopped. Then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing where the moss met the gravel road stood a figure. Yellow slicker. But up. But it wasn't me. It wasn't Aloan. The posture was wrong, too stiff, too tall. The hands hung limp, fingers curled inward like claws. And when it turned its head just slightly, I saw the glint of something beneath the hood. Not eyes. Blessed. Reflective. Empty. My blood turned to ice. Because I remembered now. The night I vanished in 2012, I hadn't run from a voice in the woods. I'd run from the thing that wore my face after it took me. And it hadn't stayed behind. It had followed. All these years it had been waiting, not for me to remember but for me to return. To bring others. To fill the hollow with listeners, so it could harvest them. The figure raised a hand. Not in greeting. In invitation. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the trees. Dozens of them. All in yellow slickers. All hooded. All moving with that same unnatural stillness. And then I heard it, the sound I'd mistaken for the wind, for the trees, for the voice of the earth. It was laughter. Dry. Metallic. Repeating my name not as a call but as a lure. Aloan. 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 I stumbled back toward the heartwood, fumbling for the bone knife. But the roots above me recoiled, their light dimming to a sickly gray. The locket around my neck grew cold, so cold it burned. I turned to run for the passage. Too late. From the chamber below, a chorus of voices rose, sweet, familiar, trusting. The seekers. Calling my name. Not in warning. In welcome. They hadn't heard the hollow. They'd heard it. And they'd answered. The figure in the yellow slicker stepped forward, lowering its hood at last. My face stared back. But the eyes were hollow. Filled with static. And behind me the chamber doors slammed shut. Not by wind. By hands that were no longer mine.